In our previous lesson we explored the doctrine of the logos and the harmony of opposites. Today we complete our study of Heraclitus by entering a different dimension of his thought. If the logos was the formal law of the cosmos, fire is its material principle. The cosmos was not made by any god or any man, Heraclitus writes. It was ever, is now, and ever shall be an ever-living fire, kindled in measures and extinguished in measures. But fire is not merely an element. It is the very image of becoming. We step and do not step into the same rivers, we are and are not. Nothing remains identical to itself, and yet everything returns cyclically to its source. Within this universal flux, the human soul is a spark of that cosmic fire, a warm breath that can rise toward wisdom or be quenched in ignorance. Today we explore fire, flux, and the soul in the thought of the obscure of Ephesus. In the first lesson on Heraclitus we explored the logos, the universal law that unifies opposites, the invisible harmony that governs the cosmos. But that exploration left a question open. If everything changes, what is change itself made of? If nothing abides, is there something that explains the order of becoming? The first dimension of the problem is physical. The Milesians had sought a stable material principle, water, air, the indefinite. Heraclitus breaks with that search for stability. His material principle is not something that abides, but the very process of transformation. Fire is not one element among others. It is the substance of becoming, the matter of which change is made. The second dimension is psychological. If the cosmos is fire and flux, what is the human soul? Is it also fire? Can the soul know the truth if it is itself in perpetual change, if it is a flame that kindles and is extinguished? This brings us to the third point, from logos to fire. There is no break here with the first Heraclitus, but an unfolding. In the first lesson, the logos was the formal law of the cosmos. Now Heraclitus shows that this same law has a material dimension. Fire is not one element among others. It is the physical manifestation of the logos, the matter of which change is made. From the logical order we pass to the physical order, but the law is the same. All things are one, and that one is fire. For reconstructing the doctrine of fire, flux, and the soul in Heraclitus we have at our disposal sources that present a particular problem. Aristotle, in the Metaphysics and on the Heavens, attributes to Heraclitus the doctrine of fire as the material principle of all things. But Aristotle tends to read his predecessors through the lens of his own theory of the four causes, and his testimony must be nuanced. Plutarch, in his treatise on the Epsilon at Delphi, transmits several fragments on fire, flux, and the cyclical transformation of the elements that do not appear in other sources. But the most problematic source is also the richest, the Stoics. Chrysippus and other philosophers of the Porch appropriated Heraclitus to the point of regarding him as their forerunner. They interpreted fire as seminal reason, as the rational principle that governs the cosmos, and identified it with fate and providence. Many fragments on fire and flux reach us precisely through them. The problem is evident. The Stoics cited Heraclitus to support their own doctrine, and it is very difficult to separate what is authentically Heraclitean from what is Stoic reworking. This question remains one of the liveliest debates among specialists. In the first lesson we situated Heraclitus in the aristocratic Ephesus of the 6th century, under Persian rule. But there is another dimension of his context that sheds light on his doctrine of fire and the soul, the religious one. Ephesus was a melting pot of spiritual traditions. The cult of Artemis, whose temple was one of the 7 wonders, coexisted with Eastern influences arriving through the Persian Empire. Heraclitus deposited his book in that temple, as a sacred offering, suggesting that he attributed a religious character to his work. Heraclitus fiercely criticized the Dionysian mysteries and popular cults. The rites of Dionysus, he said, are impure. Yet at the same time he used their language. Dionysus, the god who dies and is reborn, is a figure of becoming. The fire that consumes and regenerates all things has affinities with the Persian cult of Zoroaster, where fire is the purifying principle par excellence. The doctrine of the cosmic cycle, fire kindling and extinguishing in measure, evokes both the Milesian tradition and Eastern cosmologies. Heraclitus did not copy these influences, but transformed them into something new, a philosophy of becoming that is at once physics and theology. Heraclitus's reception in antiquity was as rich as it was complex. The Stoics, from the 3rd century before the Common Era onward, claimed him as their forerunner. Chrysippus wrote a commentary on Heraclitus, now lost. The Stoic concept of logos, the divine reason that governs the cosmos, is in large measure a reworking of the Heraclitean logos. Fire as seminal reason, as the active principle that penetrates all things, owes much to the obscure of Ephesus. Later, Philo of Alexandria, a Hellenized Jew, interpreted the Heraclitean logos in the light of the Book of Genesis. The logos as an intermediary between God and the world, as the instrument of creation. What began as an enigmatic sentence in a book deposited in the Temple of Artemis ended up as one of the most fertile concepts in all of ancient philosophy. We have reached the core of Heraclitus's cosmology. 2 fragments offer us the key to his doctrine of fire and flux. The first, one of the most celebrated in all of Presocratic philosophy, runs, "This cosmos, the same for all, none of the gods nor of men made, but it was ever, is now, and ever shall be an ever-living fire, kindled in measures and extinguished in measures." The second, no less important, states, "Into the same rivers we step and do not step, we are and we are not." What exactly does it mean that the cosmos is fire? Heraclitus is not saying that everything is literally burning. He is saying something deeper. Fire is not one element among others, like the water of Thales or the air of Anaximenes. It is the material principle of the cosmos, the substance from which everything proceeds and to which everything returns. But unlike water or air, fire is not stable. It is pure activity, pure transformation. A flame is never the same from one instant to the next, and yet it remains the same flame. Fire is the perfect image of being as becoming. There is no permanent substrate beneath change. Change itself is what is permanent. The cosmos, says Heraclitus, was not made by any god or any man. It is eternal, but its eternity is not that of a motionless substance, like the being of Parmenides. It is the eternity of a cycle. Fire kindles and extinguishes in measure. It transforms into water, and water into earth, and earth returns to water, and water to fire. There is no absolute beginning and no final end. There is a rhythm. The word, measure, is decisive here. Becoming is not chaos. It is not a disordered flux. It is governed by the logos, by the same law that unifies opposites. Change is order, and order is change. The second fragment completes this vision with one of the most powerful images in the history of thought, the river. Into the same rivers we step and do not step, we are and we are not. Heraclitus is not saying that everything flows ceaselessly, as if nothing could be identified. He is saying something more subtle. The river is the same and is not the same. Its waters change at every instant, yet its course remains. We ourselves are and are not. We change constantly and yet we remain who we are. Identity is not a thing. It is a process. What abides is not a substance, but a structure, a way of changing. The logos is not behind becoming, like an external law. It is in becoming itself, like the rhythm that orders it. Heraclitus did not merely proclaim that the cosmos is fire and that all things become. As with his doctrine of the logos, he offered reasons to support it. And those reasons, once again, are not abstract deductions, but observations of nature that anyone can verify. Let us examine the 3 main grounds that articulate his cosmology. The first ground appeals to what we see every day. Fire transforms before our eyes. A flame consumes wood and turns it into smoke and ash. The sun's heat evaporates the water of the sea, which rises, condenses into clouds, and falls again as rain. The whole of nature is an unceasing cycle of transformations. No stable element, neither the water of Thales nor the air of Anaximenes, can account for this dynamism. Only fire, which is pure activity, pure metamorphosis, accounts for change without abandoning unity. Everything proceeds from fire and everything returns to it, but that return is not a going back to the same, but a continuous transformation. The second ground is more subtle. Fire does not burn chaotically. It kindles and extinguishes in measure. There is a rhythm, a proportion, an order in becoming. Heraclitus does not see change as an unpredictable chaos, but as a regulated cycle. What appears as destruction is, in reality, transformation. The wood that burns does not vanish, it becomes heat, light, smoke, ash. Nothing is lost, everything is transformed. And that transformation is not random, it is governed by the logos, which establishes the proportions, the measures, the rhythms of change. Becoming is not the opposite of order. It is order itself in its temporal unfolding. The third ground is the most original and the one that connects cosmology with psychology. The human soul is a spark of the cosmic fire. It is a warm breath, a portion of the principle that animates the universe. When the soul knows, it burns brighter. When it degrades, it grows moist. Wisdom is pure, dry, luminous fire. Ignorance is water that quenches the flame. Drunkenness, says Heraclitus, is a moist soul. The drunkard cannot control his steps because his soul has become water. Knowledge is not the accumulation of data. It is combustion. It is stoking the flame we already are, making it burn more intensely, raising it toward the dry and the warm, which is the divine. The dry soul is the wisest and the best. The doctrine of fire and becoming was no exercise in Ionian physics without consequences. It set in motion implications that transformed cosmology, psychology, and ethics, and that anticipated ideas science and philosophy would take centuries to rediscover. Let us examine the four main consequences. The first consequence is cosmological. Heraclitus conceived the universe as a cycle without beginning or end. There is no creation out of nothing, as in Genesis, and no absolute destruction. Fire transforms into water, water into earth, and these return to fire in a rhythmic sequence governed by measure. The cosmos breathes. It expands and contracts. It kindles and extinguishes. This cyclical vision of the universe departs both from Milesian cosmology, which sought a stable principle, and from the Judeo-Christian vision that would dominate centuries later. The cosmos is not a clock someone set in motion. It is a fire that burns eternally, with no need of any creator. The second consequence is psychological. If the cosmos is fire, the human soul is a spark of that fire. A portion of the principle that animates the universe dwells within us. Its excellence, its arete, consists in remaining dry, that is, in burning with the greatest intensity. Wisdom is pure, luminous, hot fire. Ignorance is moisture that quenches the flame. Drunkenness, excess, lack of measure are ways of extinguishing the inner fire. Psychology thus becomes a physics of the soul. To know the soul is to know fire. The third consequence is ethical. To live well is not to avoid conflict or to seek a peace without tensions. It is to burn with the right intensity. It is to keep the soul dry, which does not mean repressing desires, but not letting pleasure moisten it until it is extinguished. Moderation is not renunciation, it is controlled combustion. Ethics is not obedience to external rules, but attunement to the logos that governs the cosmic fire. The fourth consequence is the historical legacy. Few doctrines have had such a rich posterity. The Stoics took up fire as a rational principle, as logos spermatikos governing all things. Nietzsche found in Heraclitus the first philosopher who said yes to becoming, yes to change, yes to life without need of other worlds or consolations. And modern physics, with its principle of the conservation of energy, nothing is created, nothing is destroyed, everything is transformed, resonates with that intuition of the obscure of Ephesus. Heraclitus had no laboratories and no equations, but he looked at fire and understood that the world was transformation. And that intuition is still burning. Interpreting the doctrine of fire and flux runs up against difficulties that have occupied generations of specialists. The first concerns the very status of fire. Is it a material principle in the strict sense, like the water of Thales? Or is it rather a metaphor for becoming, an image of change not to be taken literally? Aristotle interpreted it as a physical element, but his reading is conditioned by his own theory of the four causes. The second question is whether Heraclitus defended the doctrine of eternal return. Some fragments speak of cycles that repeat, but it is unclear whether they speak of an identical return or of a spiral that never comes back to exactly the same point. The third question concerns the soul. The phrase, "the dry soul is the wisest," is one of the most enigmatic fragments. Is it a physiological claim, the soul literally grows moist with drunkenness? A moral metaphor, temperance keeps the soul in its best state, or a theory of knowledge, only the dry soul can know the truth? It is probably all three at once, but the question divides specialists. Finally, there is the problem of Stoic transmission. We know the Stoics cited Heraclitus to support their own doctrine of fire as seminal reason. Separating what is authentically Heraclitean from what is a reworking of the porch is one of the most delicate tasks of Presocratic philology. The obscure of Ephesus keeps his secrets still. The doctrine of fire and flux has drawn interpretations as passionate as they are opposed. Nietzsche, in his final writings, claimed Heraclitus as his philosophical ancestor. For him, becoming was not a curse, but a game. Fire kindling and extinguishing in measure is a child at play, pure innocence, pure creation, pure eternity. The world is the game of Zeus, Nietzsche wrote, reading Heraclitus. There is no guilt, no punishment, no redemption, only the eternal play of fire. At the opposite extreme, Karl Popper, in The Open Society and Its Enemies, launched a fierce critique. For Popper, Heraclitus is the forerunner of totalitarian historicism. His doctrine of becoming as an inexorable law, his idea that change is governed by a hidden logos that only the wise grasp, anticipates Hegel and Marx. It is the philosophical seed of regimes that claim to know the inevitable course of history. Against these political readings, Hans-Georg Gadamer offered a more existential interpretation. Heraclitus is the thinker of human finitude. The logos is not a law that rules from without, but the experience of our own limits. The soul that seeks to know itself discovers that it is fire, inexhaustible, unfathomable, forever in motion. 3 readings, 3 Heracliteans: the child at play, the prophet of totalitarianism, and the teacher of finitude. We have reached the end of our second lesson on Heraclitus, and with it we close our study of the obscure of Ephesus. 3 points deserve to be held onto. The first is fire as a material principle. The cosmos was made by no god and no man. It is an ever-living fire, kindled and extinguished in measure. Heraclitus did not seek a stable principle, as the Milesians had. He sought a principle that was itself transformation. Fire is not one element among others. It is the substance of becoming, the matter of which change is made. The second point is that becoming is the ultimate reality. There is no permanent substrate beneath change. The only thing that does not change is the law of change, the logos. Into the same rivers we step and do not step, we are and we are not. Identity is not a thing, but a process. What abides is not a substance, but a structure, a way of changing. The logos is not behind becoming, like an external law. It is in becoming itself, like the rhythm that orders it. The third point is that the human soul is a spark of that cosmic fire. A portion of the principle that animates the universe dwells within us. Its excellence consists in remaining dry, in burning with the greatest intensity. Wisdom is pure, luminous, hot fire. Ignorance is moisture that quenches the flame. To know is not to accumulate information. It is to stoke the fire we already are. That is why we close with this thought. Heraclitus looked at fire and understood that the world was transformation. He looked at the river and understood that identity was a process. He looked at the soul and understood that to know was to burn. For those wishing to pursue Heraclitus further, the standard critical edition of the fragments remains Deals and Kranz's Presocratic fragments. As for secondary literature, 3 works offer very different perspectives. Nietzsche, in Twilight of the Idols, presents Heraclitus as the philosopher of becoming as play and of fire as eternal innocence. Karl Popper, in The Open Society and Its Enemies, launches a fierce critique. Heraclitus as the forerunner of totalitarian historicism, the first philosopher to claim that the course of history is governed by a hidden law. And Hans-Georg Gadamer, in Truth and Method, offers a more existential reading. The Heraclitean logos as an experience of human finitude, as an encounter with our own limits. In our next philosophy lesson we shall enter the thought of Xenophanes of Colophon, an implacable critic of the Homeric gods and one of the first thinkers to formulate a rational theology. We hope you will join us there. Thank you for your attention. Until next time.